Hey everyone, Sean here. This is a kitchen sink full of kale. And if you're wondering why I'm showing you this, it's because today I'm going to share with you my sun-dried tomato and garlic kale chip recipe. You want to start with individually rinsing each leaf. Grab the leaf by the stem, fold it in half so that you can pull as much of the leaf away from the stem as you can. The bigger the leaf, the bigger the chip at the back end of the recipe. You're probably wondering why you would want to put kale into your diet in the first place. A lot of people don't like leafy greens. Well, kale is kind of a powerhouse when it comes to nutrient load. One, it's extremely high in protein. It has 9 essential amino acids as well as 9 non-essential amino acids. Its essential fatty acid profile contains more omega-3s than omega-6s. The omega-3s are ultimately the ones that add to and enhance anti-inflammatory properties, so that's a good thing. Kale's also the king of carotenoids. Carotenoids help your eyesight, so you're helping your vision just by adding kale to your diet. It's got more calcium per serving than milk. And the fiber contained within is actually a prebiotic, which means it can feed the digestive microbes within your system and in a sense enhance your digestion. Once I've removed all the stems from the leaves, I like to collect them in large bowls. I usually get about 8 bunches or so of kale, which ends up giving me about 3 large bowls worth of leaves. Now, each one of those bunches of kale always has in the dead center very young, very small leaves that are really not worth tearing off and adding to the chip count, so we'll save those for juicing. The dressing is comprised of 50% olive oil, 50% canola oil. Now, in the very beginning, I used to use pure olive oil in this, and the only thing that did was make the recipe more expensive. Canola oil doesn't have that much flavor, so the olive oil still takes over. And then, of course, I throw about 5 or 6 cloves of garlic, whole cloves of garlic into the bottom of the mixer. Alright, next up we're going to add some sun-dried tomatoes to the mix. I prefer the ones that are stored in extra virgin olive oil, mainly because of flavor. There are sun-dried tomatoes that are available that are just in a pouch, and they're almost like jerky. There's really no moisture at all in there. And the flavor doesn't come through anywhere near as well as the ones that are stored in olive oil. Okay, when you're massaging the dressing onto the leaves, you don't want it to just roll off and not coat the leaves at all. So I use flaxseed as a flavor enhancer because it will give it a little bit of a nutty flavor on the back end, but at the same time, ground down into the dressing, it will actually give enough texture to coat the leaf and stick to the leaf so it doesn't just fall off during the drying process. Sunflower seeds also add to that texture and to that thickness of the dressing, making it stick to the leaf. So you can actually see part of that mixture still on the leaf even after it's dried. Next up, we're going to add some fresh ground black pepper. Now, for recipes and measurement's sake, we're going to add a teaspoon to a teaspoon and a half to the entire mixture. I personally like a very peppery kale chip, so I have a tendency to just open up the side that has the pore hole and dump it in. Next up, we're going to add some sea salt. Now, I just happen to have some coarse sea salt sitting around the house. We are putting all of this mixture in a blender, so it really doesn't matter if you have coarse or fine. Measurement-wise, we're sitting at about tablespoon to 2 tablespoons. It's now time to bring the dressing together, get it mixed, and get it ready to be massaged onto the kale chips. The blender that I have, the Vitamix, actually has settings that control blade speed as well as how long the blender is actually on. The setting that I use fairly consistently for the mixture I like to put on the kale chips is actually the soup setting. And the reason I do that is because after about a minute to 2 minutes, two things happen. One, the color will actually change quite a bit. As you can see right about now, it's starting to turn red. And that lets me know that the blades have actually chopped up the sun-dried tomatoes and the seeds enough that it goes from a tan to a reddish color. The other thing that will happen is it'll start to get warm. On the soup setting, I can actually drop all the ingredients of anything I would want in a soup in, and after 6 minutes, it will come out a piping hot soup. But for this dressing, I just go a couple of minutes until it's warm. Now it's time to apply the dressing to our kale. You want to start by putting a towel down in your workspace. No matter what, we're dealing with an oil-based dressing. So just the simple act of taking the lid off of the mixer or massaging the oil onto the leaves can create splash, and you want something that can actually collect a little bit of that splash. It just makes cleanup a little easier at the back end. When I first started this working with kale chips, I used to take a ladle and measure out an exact amount and pour it into each individual bowl and then massage on to the leaves slowly. I stopped doing that because there was a couple of batches that I made where I had entire trays that were almost flavorless. It was basically like I had picked a leaf up off of the ground and just started nibbling on it. Now I'm a lot more generous with how much of the dressing I actually apply to the kale. And as you can see here, it's not a very vigorous process of massaging and working the dressing onto the kale leaves. You want to take your time and almost treat it like bread dough. Fold, knead, twist and turn, and then eventually all the leaves will have a coating. Okay, these are my circular dehydrator trays. Now, the particular model that I am using is by a company called Nesco, and the reason I chose it was because I could actually add more trays to this particular stack. The initial dehydrator comes with 4 trays, but you can put up to 16 trays, so that gives you a lot of surface area to work with. When you're placing the leaves on the tray, you want to see as little white underneath them as possible. You don't want leaves stacked completely on top of each other, but you also don't want a bunch of open spaces either. To make sure I'm being efficient with space and time, I'm going to take the last of my trays and load them with some Carolina Reaper hot peppers. Now, putting these on the dehydrator won't affect the flavor of the kale chips, but it will dry my peppers out so that I can make a powder out of them later. This is my Nesco dehydrator. As you can see, there's a lot of different settings on it, which ultimately kind of depend on what you're making. I have a habit of leaving it on the 160-degree temperature setting for jerky because it dries things out faster. Now, as far as the rest of that dressing was concerned, waste not, want not, I will actually pour all of this into a container and hold on to it. I don't like to use it on future batches of kale because there is some time that goes by and I get concerned about whether or not the oil stays, fresh. But I do like to use this as a marinade or a salad dressing for, other recipes. Making sure that we're using all of the plant. The stems and remainders of the leaves can either be used for juicing, or I might actually ground them up and pour them directly into my raised garden bed. Earlier in the video, we talked about grocery store kale chips looking more like a bag of crumbs than actual kale chips. This is why I like the dehydrator more so than the baking method, because as you can see here, The kale chips are all fairly large, and they don't break once I actually peel them off of the tray. Thanks again for watching. Make sure and hit the notification button because there will be more videos to come. And don't forget to subscribe.